the hard hat. Sing me the reflection of the sun and the snow in the glasses beneath the hard hat. Sing me the rumbling sorter. Sing me the distortion of the sun and the snow in the window of the cabin of the rumbling sorter and in the glasses beneath the hard hat.
Sing me, sing me, sing me the deep pools of blue. Sing me, sing me, sing me the rumbling sorter.
When poet and performer Ian Macmillian goes on the road with a new band later this year, it'll be just the latest stage of a journey, a mission he's been on for the last 30 years, to take the word in the shape of poems, stories and songs to the people and encourage them to have a go with words themselves.
Midnight in Countersthorpe Village Hall. Midnight in Countersthorpe Village Hall. Midnight in Countersthorpe Village Hall. Woo!
He's been on Have I Got News For You and become a familiar and distinctive voice on radio.
Welcome to the Verb. And don't you agree there's a kind of predestination about that?
He presents Radio 3's literary cabaret, The Verb.
As soon as I say welcome to, then the words the verb are waiting in the queue for me to say them.
He's the first choice for timely squibs on topical events for news programmes.
This is me. As some long-forgotten politician spouted from beneath a hat. Stop standing on your soapbox.
And presents quirky documentaries on Radio 4, which delight some and infuriate others.
When we hear Ian on the radio, we go, yes, it's Ian again. It's our Ian from up the road.
Let him present programmes about forgotten Britain. I'm all for that. But don't let him, in the middle of his presenting these programmes about forgotten Britain, suddenly start spouting his poems, because it's just buttock clenching. It's embarrassing.
The high-speed train to the top of the map and back again, shining in the sunshine, gleaming in the rain.
McMillan concedes that his work has become increasingly populist, though he still does write serious poetry for the page, and he sees no harm in taking a corporate shilling. For him, it's the poet's job to please many audiences, and behind everything he does is a conviction that language, particularly poetry, improves lives. He's proud to be a community poet, and he still lives and works within a mile of where he was born in South Yorkshire. We asked him to explore how his community shaped his work, then followed him as he crisscrossed the country pursuing his vocation as a non-metropolitan latter-day troubadour.
I remember as a lad coming down to church on a Sunday and walking past this stone, and gradually the words on it caught my eye, and it's an amazing thing. It says, "Here lieth the mortal remains of Robert Millthorpe, who inadvertently threw this stone upon himself whilst in the employ of James Raywood of Ardsley." And I could never fathom that. And it's an amazing stone because it's about the futility of life. It's a bit absurd, it's a bit strange. This fella threw the stone on himself, so the gaffer said, all right, bury him under it. And at the bottom, there's a poem. One of the first poems I ever read. And it's amazing that somebody dies, somebody's crushed to death, and they commemorate that with a poem. The poem's not great, but it's full of heartfelt feeling. Alas, how frail this brittle clay, though formed with matchless art. Death waits in ambush for his prey, and none escapes his dart. A youthful frolic prompted on, while the grim tyrant gave the mortal stroke by this same stone that marks my early grave. We used to sing a hymn called Hills of the North Rejoice, Valleys and Lowlands Sing. It had the most astonishing language in it. Shores of the utmost west, ye that have journeyed long. The music of the language seemed to speak to somewhere beyond understanding, which I think is one of the things that poetry can do. This is the tomb of Ebenezer Elliott, a radical 19th century poet who was known as the Corn Law Rhymer. He wrote poems against the Corn Laws. And that interested me, the idea he could write poems for political purposes. And the reason he's got these spikes around him is the story is that John Betjeman came and said, you must protect your poets. I like that idea, the idea of poets being protected. I think words mean everything to me. I think words are so powerful. And it's always amazed me how words can make you laugh, can make you cry, but also words can shock you and they can horrify you. You get fascinated by them all the time, and maybe you use them too much. You know, I tend to spout all the time. I never shut up. Now, I shouldn't say this in such august company, but I think you can't spell things wrong. You can only spell them better. And sometimes, when you spell them wrong, they sound better. And also, I'm going to advocate for one day a year, apostrophe amnesty day. Just put it any way you want, just for one day a year. People call me Bard of Barnsley, which wasn't a thing I chose myself. Somebody called me that, the local paper called it me. And while I think that's a bit cheesy, I do like the idea of the bard, the public poet, the poet who can be seen to be being a poet.
Are they all psyched up, ready to go this afternoon or what? Oh, wow. Do you like it? Ian Macmillian poet. Is it?
Somebody who turns up at the football match or on the bus or on the station and people go, oh, it's that poet, it's that poet. Tell us a poem. You know, you go to the shop, you buy a bag of crisps, they go, you'll write a poem about this. You go, well, perhaps I will, but it's that idea that, you know, the poet is part of the ordinary place.
I'm going to buy 2 pork pies now. 2 pork pies, please. Keep me going for the weekend.
174, please.
174. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, shall I eat them both now? Perhaps not.
I've never moved more than half a mile from where I was born, although I travel a lot for my job, but I like that idea that the poet can be seen as somehow rooted in the place they live, in the language and the way people think. This is Great Alton Church, and my mother was born in the village of Great Alton, and this church is somewhere we used to walk to from Darfield, which wasn't far away, and my mother would come to Great Alton once a fortnight to get her hair done. So in Great Alton she would buy me the comics that fed me literary ambitions, so things like the Victor the Valiant, the Beano the Dandy, and what she called a commando book. From here you could look down across to Alton Main, and beyond that you could probably see Darfield Main, Corton Woods. It was very much a pit area. My mother's dad worked at Durham Valley Drift Mine, then he was a cobbler. She liked this area, and her mate had a pen pal on my dad's ship because my dad went and joined the Navy in 1937. My dad was from a place called Carnwath in Lanarkshire, and so my mum started writing to my dad. And I think that's one of the reasons that I love words, that writing was so important to them. They wrote to each other for years, these passionate letters. And then they met and they got married on a 48-hour pass. My mum, who was by this time in the WAFs, was refused a 48-hour pass, so she went AWOL to get married. What a romantic thing. She went up and they got married. My dad was, when he left the Navy, he was still a Navy man who just happened to not be in the Navy anymore. You know, and he'd stand to attention beside the chair when he'd had his dinner, and he would still roll a bit. And they were a very interesting couple who gave me, I think, a love of language, a love of words.
The story of J. McMillan, RN retired's morning. 06:45. My dad goes downstairs. On the 8th step, there's always a creaking sound. And my dad gets to the bottom of the stairs and switches on the light. What he was doing? He was telling the house what he was doing. He was explaining to the house just what he was doing. And the house never replied.
He worked in a firm of architects. Hadfield, Cockwell and Davidson, the partners, and he rose to become company secretary. And he had a primitive adding machine that he'd bring home and add away. But really, at the back of his head, he was still a sailor, I think. Sometimes you wonder where your poetry comes from, and for me, a lot of it came from this Sunday afternoon drive. My dad would drive very slowly, and he would say things like, full steam ahead, full ahead forward. And then he'd sing all the time. And he'd always sing the same song for the whole of the 1960s up to about 1966. He sang Donald, Where's Your Trousers? Let the wind blow high, let the wind blow low, through the streets of my Kiltal go, all the lasses say, hello, Donald, where's your trousers? And my dad ended up, he had a stroke. And a man who sailed the 7 seas and took us on these Sunday afternoon drives ended up sat in a chair, didn't move. But one of the last things to leave him was the singing. And that's why I believe that singing and poetry are very close together.
And the car goes down Doncaster Road, up Nanimar Road, past the post office, down Snape Hill, past Low Valley School, past the Astoria Ballroom, and up Woodwalk, and on to Sheffield, as the sun shines on my dad's bald head, but he doesn't really mind.
It was a bit odd that my dad didn't work down the pit when most people did. It was always assumed that everybody, more or less everybody, worked down the pit. And if you were clever, you went to the pit officers. And there was always that idea that it was a cradle-to-grave thing. It looked after you. The NCB looked after you, and the NUM looked after you. There was the idea that this was a place that would never change. I remember writing this essay, Barnsley in the year 2000, and it said, "We will eat our dinner in tablet form, and we'll all wear silver suits, and we'll go to the pit on a monorail." Because the idea was that the pit would never alter, it would always be there, but we'd go to it on a monorail. Little did we know.
Over there's the wall that local legend has it the pit owner had built so that him and his posh friends wouldn't have to see the miners walking down to the pit, because they were all little men in flat caps.
The pitmen would walk on this path behind me and walk across this bridge to Alton Main Colliery, which is just over there. And this used to be a railway line, and it's now been replaced by a road that connects us with civilization. When I was a lad, I used to come down here train spotting.
The Thames Clyde Express, on its long way north, slows almost to a stop. And a restaurant car packed with toffs is tucking into something served by a chef in a sculpted hat, brandishing a spoon that shone. We waved. We waved our notebooks and pencils as behind the train the pit wheels turned as a shift came up or went down. A man in a suit turned to us with a face like a half-dead balloon, lifted two fuck-off fingers high in the air.
I think there's always been a kind of oppositional attitude around here. You certainly got that in the 80s, when things were being shut down wholesale. It felt to us that here's an area that's going to be punished because it's not part of the prevailing wind, the prevailing Tory thing.
This bus shelter's where the pit bus would come, and hundreds of miners would get off here, and there'd be 3,000 or 4,000 people working at Alton Main Pit, and this would be a hive of activity. The pithead baths were down there, the pit yard, the winding gear, and thousands of tons of coal being dug up all the time.
Get moving. Come on, go. No way. Listen, move. No way. Listen, no way. You're blocking the footpath. Right, arrest him then.
The strike was in 84, so I was born in 56, so I was in my 20s. I'd given my job up by then. I was working as a writer and a poet all over the place. I remember I was in this band called Circus of Poets, and there were 4 of us. We had these costumes that were bright shirts, braces, and funny trousers. And we were in costume driving down the A1. We were stopped by the coppers going down the A1. They going picketing. What, dressed as they? We're dressed like clowns? That was strange. But also the idea that outside this area, people didn't seem to understand it. People didn't seem to see what was happening.
The first cavalry charge came a few minutes later, and it clearly worried the pickets.
And things that you'd find extraordinary became the norm, coppers driving down the street, switching the sirens on at 4 o'clock to wake you up, and things that you would never think would happen. So I wrote poems about it, which I think is the response the poet should have.
The field is turned over, riddled, left to freeze. There is nothing here. A dozen police vans rumble down the road towards Corton Wood. A man throws his shovel on the stiff ground. The harsh wind clutches us. We say nothing. Yet still my daughter insists on waking at 4 in clenched blue darkness. And downstairs we build on the floor before dawn, using bricks, people, books, anything.
I remember after the strike, there was a terrible thing where a lot of miners got made redundant, and they went out and bought word processors because they'd been to the library and they'd read books by Geoffrey Archer, and they said, I could do that. And they'd sit there and I'd say, no, write about your life, write about your life. But instead what they've written terrible thrillers that were nothing to do with their life. So I've always encouraged people to write about this place, write about round here, write about what you've done, because it is important. There is quite a movement in, you know, in working class autobiography round here, and it should be written about, because if it's not, then it goes.
See you, scab. See you, scab's dad. See you, informer. See you, thief for Baghdad. Cheerio, chaplain. Later, mate. See you, Bobby Moore. See you, Packy Floor. See you, double glazing. See you later, Al Gore. See you all later, waiting for the last pit bus. See you, Fred Astaire. Bye-bye, Boyle Puss. We won't see your like anymore. You know the pit is shutting. The pit is shutting. The pit is shutting, and it's time to go.
This is fame. This is my postcard. I gave it to somebody the other day. They posted it to me. He said, I said you'd send you a postcard. Mr. Ian Macmillan, Barnsley. That's fame.
It's good night from him and good night to this Saturday bath time, a home wind, the bliss of a night in the glow of a rented TV. A family spread out on 2 chairs, 1 settee.
In West Yorkshire, we call your dinner that you take down pit is snap.
Well, they used to have snap tins, didn't they?
They?
Metal tins that used to snap together.
It's an acme on top. And once you get down to Derbyshire, they call their house their arse. I've had an extension fitted on my arse, have you? I've had a couple of words in my dictionary that I've made up. The word griddle is going to be in, which is the art of pissing down a grate. I'm just going for a griddle. I would think on average I go down to London 2 or 3 times a week, then often up to Newcastle, sometimes across to Manchester. Always by train, because I don't drive. And that's good, because it means I can get my work done. The train becomes my office, my pied-à-terre. I can sit doing a bit of work. I always like to sit in the bit between the carriages, because it's like a little cheap hotel room. You've got a toilet, you've got a bench, you can sit and do work. You haven't got to listen to business people torturing the English language on the phone.
Chesterfield, Derby, Birmingham New Street, Cheltenham Spa.
And that's what I'm doing. I'm always watching these people. I love trains and stations because the points of transit. People are going somewhere. They might only be going to Goole or Retford, but they're going somewhere interesting. And I love the train spotters. I think people take the mickey out of train spotters and they shouldn't. I'd love to make a programme or write a story about train spotters because they love trains as much as I do. And maybe one day when I retire I'll become a train spotter. Just off to the BBC to do my weekly programme, The Verb, Radio 3's Cabaret of Language. We commission new pieces of writing, we commission new poems, we get performers, we get songwriters, and it's all about language and how it works, and that's what's exciting about it.
2 boring men in suits, both suffering from post-traumatic sandwich disorder, perform death by small talk. How was your lunch? How was your evening? Read any good books lately? How was your... How was your last breath? Did it catch you unawares? Did it...
I was a bit nervous when they first set me on because they rang up and said, do you want to do a show on Radio 3? And I thought, now then, this is where they find you out. Because, you know, me, Radio 3, but in fact it works because Radio 3 is a very welcoming home for it. Now, to resolve this philosophical conundrum in which we found ourselves tonight and to confirm this is the best Friday night we've ever had, been sent or chosen, the great Peter Blegbad's here with an ear tune about predestination and free will, I believe, Peter.
Yes, that's right. Of course, on a pragmatic level, we are all morally responsible, but there's a deeper philosophical level.
We needed the presenter to be somebody who would be happy introducing a performance poet from Brixton and then back announcing him or her and then turning to, say, a Nobel Prize winner in the same studio and saying, you know, what do you think of that? And not everyone can do it.
Now, that war in Southeast Asia is rich literary territory.
It's very difficult, I think, for any of us to imagine The Verb without Ian.
Now, Richard Flanagan is one of Australia's leading novelists, and we're proud to have him on The Verb. Richard, all books are written for a reason, but this one feels like a particularly driven novel. So what for you is its purpose?
Well, I think Like a lot of people, I felt a stranger to my time after 2001.
Part of, I think, Ian's secret is this business he told me once. I mean, it's being available for joy, which might sound cheesy and loved up to you, but his enthusiasm is entirely genuine.
You're listening to The Verb with me, Ian Macmillan, a man who was told by an old man in a cave in 1963 that one day he'd end up presenting a programme on Radio 3 called The Verb.
For the BBC, MacMillan also creates distinctive radio documentaries.
Did you want to go down the pit? Because were there any other options you could have gone anywhere else?
Just farming.
Farming.
There's no money there.
How much did you get then down the pit?
10 bob a day.
What I like to do is make observational documentaries that present maybe lost worlds, hidden worlds.
When you got your pony...
And you just try and get people to talk in their own voice, in their own language, about their memories and somehow make them important.
You lift them up to get them over the top. Very narrow seams.
But the ponies worked in the narrow seams as well?
Did I?
His stock in trade is what I would call quirky localism. You know, he does go into the corners that are neglected, and I do think that the radio is too metropolitan and too middle class. And I think the documentaries are very good, and he's a very good presenter, and he has a lovely way with people. He draws them out of themselves. He has a lovely, common touch.
But when it was hand-filled, you'd sweating?
Sweat. You get a drink of water and you come straight out.
So when you come out, that's why mine is like a pint.
A pint if it was straight that club.
In the end, there's one heartbeat that runs through it, which is that words are important and how you use words are important. And I talk a lot to people who've been told the way they speak isn't important. The way they speak isn't as important as the way other people speak. And I don't think that's true. So partly it's a thing that says, let's preserve it, but also I think it's a political mission that says, why can't we accept that diversity of language and say, yes, we can all talk like that. So now Armthorpe Pit's gone, hasn't it?
It's gone. Houses built on there.
Is there any sign of it being there? There's nothing left at all.
No, only the wheel.
And I know that people say I put this voice on. People say that at home I talk like Prince Charles, but that's not true. And I think, and it is a political act talking like this. To talk like this and be on mainstream radio, I'm sure is a political act, because you're saying, look, people who talk like me can be as clever and can be as intellectual as other people. The hand of history is on your shoulder, Tony. Sharp skeletal fingers, grasping, bony. The hand of history's tapping on your back as your hair recedes and your teeth turn black. The hand of history wipes it all away. The bright new morning, the shining day. The hand of history's an unforgiving fist, carrying an endless 10-year list. How history turns, how history twists, as we all lined up for Tony's kiss. We never saw the hand of history hiding in the mist. I think it often can be the case that producer wants a regional voice and they ask for me. And I find that interesting, that you don't want to be a voice on a stick. You don't want to be a voice that somebody pulls off a shelf. They think, oh, I fancy a regional voice, I'll have Ian Macmillan. I fancy a Welsh voice, I'll have so-and-so. I fancy a Scottish voice, I'll have so-and-so. What you hope they want you for is the content as much as the voice. That'd be terrible, wouldn't it? Just be known for the voice. You'd be a kind of performing monkey, which I hope I'm not.
This is one of the greatest shows on earth. Where else can you experience stories from every culture ever to inhabit the planet? All under one gigantic roof.
Some interesting previews. Ian Macmillan sounds like he's talking through a flat cap. Isn't that interesting? They wouldn't have said he sounds like he's talking through a turban, or he sounds like he's talking through a burqa. Isn't that interesting? You're allowed to take the mickey out of that.
I know that he is from Barnsley and he lives in Barnsley, and I'm from Yorkshire myself and I still have my Yorkshire accent, so it's not that in itself that I object to, but I do dislike this slightly over-the-top Bayek, Eki thump kind of routine that he does, and I find it especially annoying when you can tell that he is just being wheeled on in order that there is a regional accent. I just think that's, kind of patronising.
I think when people say that you play up the Eki thump, nobody ever says you play up the southern idiom. Nobody ever says you play up the Bexley Heath idiom or the Harrow on the Hill idiom. And I'm not playing it up. That's the thing. This is how I speak. This is how I think. This is how I talk. In fact, I'm speaking as well as I can now because I'm on the television. If I'm talking to my compatriots and my peers, I'm speaking an even thicker, deeper, more beautiful Yorkshire accent. Hello, I've come for a soup. Performing some chartered accountants in York.
All right. Very posh.
Apart from radio and television, McMillan has been poet in residence to organisations as diverse as Barnsley Football Club, Northern Spirit Trains and the Humberside Police. He also earns a crust from the after-dinner speaking circuit.
To me, it's just like the old troubadour putting on his garb, the clown putting on his motley. The odd thing is, I don't really like wearing these things, but once you put them on, you do become somebody else. Some people think this is wrong, you know. Some people think this is selling out. Some people think that poetry shouldn't go to places like this. But I say no, I think it should. I think coming to places like this feeds it. Says to people, no, poetry can come here.
Poets and accountants, two tribes misunderstood. They think one's made out of tissue paper and one's made out of wood, and at which point you've all got to go, ooh, aye. Then you've got to go, plus that. Because I think that seems to have the same ability.
Sometimes you feel a bit odd, you know, taking the shilling, but in the end, poets have always had to take the shilling, and the shilling just keeps you going and helps you write poems. I was asked to do this poem for Domestos, and I wrote that. I remember writing about the champagne of the smallest room was the title, which I thought was a good title. And we did this fantastic publicity stunt where I had to sit in a huge wooden toilet in Leicester Square. And Martin Rowson was a great cartoonist, did this cartoon, and me, looking like the fat bag of that Billy Bunter, sat pooing out poems as though that's what I do. And yeah, in some senses I do, but no, it doesn't get me down. Honestly, it doesn't. It doesn't. Yeah, that was a moment of serendipity, wasn't it? Yeah. Oh, bring it up. I think some poets do enjoy being on their own and writing on their own, and that is the conventional wisdom. But it's only conventional wisdom since Romantic times. You know, before that the poet was seen as very much part of the community. It's almost conversation. I find that working with other people, meeting other people, sitting with other people feeds me.
Your voice is also an instrument in the sound of the whole thing.
Whenever I meet people, I always say, let's work together. And 99% of the time it doesn't work. But with Luke it did, because we seem to have similar ideas.
I think I prefer this live version now to the studio one. Definitely.
Prepares to leave the house.
But the different pieces, that's lovely. How it comes
It's a lovely change, isn't it?
Gosh.
It's been a combination of actually using some of Ian's words that are already published and printed and written out, and Ian just speaking and recording, and me playing with the words and sort of reshifting them, juggling them around, and writing songs from words as well. We've kind of worked on writing some songs together too.
Dot appeared one day in the next chair to my mother at the nursing home. I asked my mother about Dot, and she said, just watch what she does with her leg. And when it came time for tea, Dot lifted her left leg high in the air, and it clicked twice.
I think when you go and visit your relatives in one of these kind of places, you never stop being a writer, and so you start collecting the stories. And my mum had this mate called Dot, who was the most remarkable woman, and I was moved to improvise this little poem about her that became a song that I think hopefully captures the spirit of Dot and also the spirit of these places.
And over that summer, as I went to see my mother at the nursing home, I'd watched Dot, when it was time for tea, lifting her leg high above her head, clicking it twice, and then leading the procession to the tea table. Dot at the front, with her false leg, and behind her, all the rest, walking, or being helped, or being pushed in wheelchairs, or walking on Zimmer frames.
I think my mother ended up the last couple of years of her life in a very nice home where they looked after her very well. And at the same time, you got the sense that here she was preparing to go, and the sense that the story, the love story that had sustained her, was on its way out. And so I wanted to write about that. And then the morning that she died, it was quite early in the morning. I was lying in bed and the phone rang, and I just wrote a poem about it, which I'm still working on, but it's a sonnet The telephone shatters the night's dark glass. I'm suddenly awake in the new year air. And in the moment it takes a life to pass, from waking to sleeping, I feel you there. My brother's voice that sounds like mine gives me the news I already knew. Outside a milk float clinks and shines, and a lit plane drones in the night's dark blue. And I feel the tears slap my torn face. The light clicks on, I rub my eyes. I'm trapped inside that empty space you float in when your mother dies, feeling that the story ends just here. The stream dried up, the smashed glass clear. I think I've changed over the years. I think when I first started, I was a populist. I went round folk clubs performing. I always wanted to be a performer. Then, at the same time, I was writing more serious poems, which got published in books. And there was funny things would happen, where you'd go to a poetry reading, where people would turn up who were expecting the funny stuff, and I'd do the serious stuff, which only worked really on the page, and they'd go away disappointed. And maybe that's a failing in me, that I've always wanted to be a crowd pleaser. And eventually, it has. I think the poetry has got more populist. I still write stuff that's quite deep, and I write that for the page. But yeah, the populist stuff has taken over, because it feels like part of the mission.
It's good night from him, and good night to this Saturday bath time, a home with the bliss of a night in the glow of a rented TV, a family spread out on 2 chairs, 1 settee.